70 years ago this week, Britain crowned its first ever #1 album. It was Frank Sinatra. Today, on Spotify, that landmark barely registers. So here is a fair question, 70 years on. Which decade actually made the biggest albums? Not the best reviewed, the most streamed. And the answer is not fair, it is not what you would guess. And one whole decade has almost vanished. The rules are simple. For every decade, we took the single most streamed album released in that decade by total Spotify plays. One album per decade, 7 decades, one ranking. And a quick note, streaming rewards the new. Almost everything Spotify plays was released in the last 15 years, so the older an album is, the harder it has had to fight to stay here. Keep that in mind, because it changes everything. We start with the present, and the present is enormous. The most streamed album of the 2020s is Bad Bunny Un Verano Sin Ti. Released in 2022, it has already passed 23.6 billion streams. A Spanish-language album, no big English crossover single, and it is the biggest album of the decade by a distance. That is the modern scale. Hold that number in your head. The 2010s were the decade streaming took over, so you would expect a monster. You get one. The Weeknd, Starboy from 2016, sits at 19.5 billion. Ed Sheeran's Divide is right on its shoulder at 18.4, and notice we are already dropping. The 2010s champion is smaller than the 2020s champion, even with a decade's head start. Then the floor drops. The most streamed album of the 2000s is Eminem, The Eminem Show from 2002. 9.9 billion, a massive album in its day, still huge now, and less than half the size of the 2010s winner. This is the cliff. Everything before streaming existed falls off it. The 1990s. The most streamed album of the decade that gave us grunge, Britpop, and the CD boom is Nirvana, Nevermind from 1991. 8.3 billion, one of the most important albums ever made, and on Spotify it now sits behind a single 2020s album by 15 billion plays. And here is where the story turns strange. The 1980s. Surely this one is safe. The best-selling album of all time, Michael Jackson's Thriller from 1982. And on streams, 8 billion. Enormous, iconic, and yet just behind Nevermind. The best-selling album in history is not even the biggest streamer of its neighbours, which sets up the twist. The 1970s, and this is the moment nobody predicts. The most streamed album of the 1970s is Fleetwood Mac, Rumours from 1977, 8.8 billion. That beats Thriller, that beats Nevermind. A 1977 breakup album, older than almost everything above it, quietly outstreaming the 80s and the 90s. Rumours never left, and the numbers prove it. Which leaves the decade that started it all, the 1960s. The biggest single 1960s album on Spotify is Abbey Road from 1969 at 4.5 billion. Every other decade beats it. Every single one. There is a wrinkle. The Beatles' bigger numbers come from later compilations, the Blue and Red albums, both put together in 1973. As 60s albums go, Abbey Road is the peak, and the peak comes last. The streaming era has quietly forgotten the 60s. Line them all up, and the shape is brutal. Streaming does not reward history, it rewards habit. The albums people still put on today win, and everything else fades, no matter how important it was. Bad Bunny outstreams the Beatles 5-1. That is not a verdict on quality, it is a verdict on what we press play on in 2026. 70 years of the album chart, and the biggest album of them all is 4 years old. So here is the better question than which streams biggest. Which is actually your favorite? On TakeRank, you rank albums 2 at a time, and it builds your real order from the choices you make. Put Rumours against Thriller, Abbey Road against anything. Find out which decade your ears belong to.